Hi, I'm 𝘃𝗓𝗋, and in this video, we'll sew this beautiful zipper pouch together step by step. It's a lovely, practical project that's perfect for beginners and mindful makers alike. Before we begin, I just want to say, this pouch looks absolutely stunning when made with tweed. The texture adds so much character and gives the whole piece a timeless, elegant look. If you're planning to use tweed, I've included extra tips in the sewing guide to help you adjust the pattern and get a clean finish. You'll find all the recommendations in the guide. There's a link to it in the video description. Before we jump into sewing, let's quickly go over a few important details in your printed pattern. Each pattern includes a test square. This should be the very first thing you measure. You can use either centimeters or inches, depending on your measuring system. You'll also see a dotted rectangle on every page. That's your cutting guideline, along with diamond-shaped alignment marks. I like to use a paper trimmer for this step. It makes the trimming faster and cleaner. After trimming, line up the diamond marks and the pattern lines carefully. Make sure everything matches up perfectly before taping the pages together. Once you cut out all the pattern pieces, you'll notice that each one is clearly marked. Pay attention to the grain line. It's important because it affects how your final project will turn out. Now, let's talk about the materials you'll need. I'm using a universal batting. It gives structure where needed, but also presses down nicely with an iron. If you prefer using a different type of stabilizer, feel free to use what you're comfortable with. For the exterior, I'm working with a medium-weight cotton fabric. And for the lining, I'm using a lightweight cotton. You'll also need 2 pieces of cotton bias tape, 2 centimeters, about 3/4 inch, wide. For the zipper, I'm using a size 5 zipper. I really like this plastic one. It looks great and gives the pouch a beautiful finish. And of course, you'll need a matching slider for it. Next, let's prepare the exterior fabric for quilting. Place the fabric on top of the batting with the shorter sides positioned horizontally and the longer sides vertically. Fold the fabric in half lengthwise and make a small notch at the center on both short edges. Then, lay the fabric flat again and use a ruler to connect the 2 notches with a straight vertical line. This line will be your first quilting guide. Finally, pin the fabric to the batting, leaving about 2 centimeters, around 1 inch of extra space at the top and bottom to prevent shifting while sewing. Now, sew along the marked center line using a 5mm stitch length. Then, continue quilting the entire piece with parallel lines, spaced 2.5 centimeters, about 1 inch apart. Here's what your quilted fabric should look like. If you're using thick batting, try to avoid pressing it too much with an iron. It can flatten the texture. Instead, use steam to gently even out the surface without touching the fabric. I'm using a steam generator and simply hovering it above the fabric to smooth it out. Now, place your quilted fabric on the table. Position the main pattern piece on top, slightly shifting it toward one side to leave enough room for the 2 side pieces. Cut out the main body and 2 side pieces from the quilted fabric. Next, transfer all notches. You can mark them directly with a fabric pen, but I recommend making small notches instead. Marking with cuts is more reliable, as chalk or fabric ink can fade during pressing and sewing. Make sure to mark all the notches exactly as shown on the pattern. They'll help you align everything accurately later. Repeat the same steps for the lining fabric. Now let's prepare the zipper. I'm using zipper tape by the meter, or by the yard, as it's often called in the US. It comes without a slider, so you can cut the exact length you need. First, Separate the zipper into 2 halves. Then, fold each half in half again and mark the center with a pin. Take the quilted main piece and your zipper. Place them right sides together, aligning the center marks first. Pin them together, starting from the center and working your way out toward both ends. This helps keep everything perfectly even and prevents shifting while sewing. Now, sew the zipper in place using a regular presser foot. Set your stitch length to 3 millimeters. This gives you a clean and secure seam. You can backstitch at the beginning and end if you want to reinforce the seam, but it's not strictly necessary at this stage. Here's what it should look like so far. You'll want to repeat the same step with the zipper on the other side of the main piece. I won't show it on screen, but the process is exactly the same. Now, take the lining piece and place it right sides together with the quilted panel. The zipper should be sandwiched between the 2 fabric layers. Pin or baste along the top edge to hold everything in place. We're working on just one side for now. You'll repeat the same steps for the other side later. For this step, we'll need a zipper foot. It's optional, but highly recommended. If you don't have one, that's totally fine. You can still attach the zipper using a regular presser foot. But if you do have a zipper foot, it will make this part easier and more precise. For the best result, it's a good idea to keep the lining piece underneath and stitch along the quilted side. This helps prevent the lining from stretching or shifting during sewing and gives you a cleaner finish. Now it's time to press the seam, but do it carefully. Focus just on the seam area and avoid pressing too far onto the quilted fabric. We want to keep the texture and structure, so try not to flatten the batting too much. A light touch with the iron is all you need here. Next, turn the piece right side out. Gently smooth out the seam and make sure the zipper lays flat, without any folds or puckering on either side. Take your time to adjust everything neatly before pressing. When pressing, focus just on the edge of the seam. We want to avoid flattening the quilted layers. A gentle press along the zipper edge will help set the shape without losing that soft, padded texture. Now, top stitch about 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge of the seam. Use a longer stitch length, somewhere between 3.5 and 5 millimeters, for a nice, clean finish. Take your time to keep the line straight and even. Here's what it should look like: clean, flat, and neatly stitched. When pressing, focus only on the seam itself. Avoid pressing down the entire quilted piece to keep its soft texture. This next step is optional, but highly recommended, especially if you're working with textured fabrics like tweed. Top stitch along both side edges about 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge. This helps secure the quilted layer and the lining together, and it prevents the fabric from shifting during the next steps. Use a longer stitch length here, around 4 to 5 millimeters, for a neat, easy finish. And this is what it should look like when you're done. To attach the zipper slider, take a look at both ends of the zipper. The quilted edges should align perfectly, no shifting or unevenness. This detail really makes a difference in the final look. Next, remove 2 or 3 zipper teeth from one side. This small offset will help the slider go on smoothly and align both sides evenly. Once the slider is in place, trim the ends of the zipper tape so they're flush with the edges of the pouch. And that's it for this step. To prepare the tabs, fold each piece of fabric in half lengthwise and press it well. If you have a pressing roll, it can really help here. It cools the fabric quickly and sets the crease more effectively. It's optional, but it makes the fold sharper and helps it hold its shape better. And here's what the tab should look like when it's ready for the next step. Next, fold both raw edges inward so they meet at the center crease, and press again to set the shape. I'm using the pressing roll once more to help cool and lock in the folds. And here are both tabs, neatly folded and ready to be top-stitched. Stitch along both long edges of the tab, about 2 millimeters from the fold. Set your stitch length to 2.5 millimeters. I like to sew both tabs at once, one after the other, without cutting the thread in between. Then I stitch the other sides the same way, so both tabs are top-stitched on both edges. At this point, I separate the two by trimming the connecting threads. And now I have two neatly finished tab pieces. If you're a beginner, here's a little tip that can make the next step easier. Before attaching the tabs to the pouch, you can fold each tab in half and sew the raw edges together. This helps keep everything aligned when sewing them into the side seams. It's not required, but it's a helpful trick, especially if you're still getting comfortable at the machine. Now it's time to attach the side tabs to the pouch. Position each tab centered over the zipper ends with the raw edges aligned. Then, sew a short basting stitch to hold them in place. No need for backstitching here. This is just to keep everything from shifting during the next steps. Here's what it should look like when the tab is basted in place. Here's another helpful tip. Especially if you're a beginner or feeling unsure about getting perfect alignment at the zipper ends. Take a needle and a double thread and tie a loop at the end. I'm making a few quick stitches right next to the zipper teeth to hold both sides together. No knots or backstitching here, just enough to keep the zipper from shifting. Once it's secured, place the side tab on top and stitch as usual. This little hand stitching step can really help you get that perfect alignment. No gaps, no slipping, just a clean, even finish. Let's start assembling the pouch. Place the side piece right side down, aligning it with the main quilted panel, right sides together. Make sure the raw edges are aligned. We're getting ready to sew the side seams. On the other side, place the lining side piece right sides together with the lining of the pouch. Now you should have a fabric sandwich, with the quilted panel, tab, and lining all stacked together. Clip all layers in place to keep everything aligned for sewing. For thick layers like this, I recommend using a hump jumper. It helps your machine glide over bulky seams with ease. Now sew 1 centimeter, or 3/8 inch, from the edge using a 2.5 to 3 millimeter stitch length. Just like before, make sure the lining is on the bottom. As you approach the tab, place the hump jumper behind the presser foot to help level it out. Sew straight across the tab, then move the hump jumper to the front to finish the seam smoothly. Here's what the finished seam looks like. Clean and even on both sides thanks to that extra support. Now it's time to top stitch along the seam for a clean finish. Press and smooth the layers, then pin them together to avoid shifting as you sew. Top stitch 3 to 4 millimeters from the edge using a 3.5 to 5 millimeter stitch length. When you reach the tab, use the hump jumper behind the presser foot. Then place it in front to finish the seam evenly. And here's the final result: smooth, straight, and beautifully stitched. Sew an edge stitch about 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge using a longer stitch, around 4 to 5 millimeters. This will keep everything in place before we close the pouch. And here's what that looks like when it's done. Neat and fully secured. Open the zipper and turn the pouch inside out. Align the side pieces with the main quilted panel, matching the notches carefully. Start by pinning the center notches, and then work your way toward the edges, keeping everything even. Pins give better precision here than clips, especially around curves. If you're a total beginner, I highly recommend basting the pieces by hand instead of sewing directly over pins. It can really help you stay in control and avoid shifting while you sew. Now, sew along the edge with a 0.5 to 0.7 centimeter seam allowance. Take your time on the curved areas. This is where folds or puckering can happen if you rush. As you're sewing around the curved edges, take your time to smooth the fabric from the inside. Really work it with your fingers to flatten everything out. Gently press the layers outward and check that there are no folds or wrinkles forming between the lining and the outer fabric. This step might seem small, but it's actually very important. If the fabric bunches up inside the seam, you might not notice it right away. But once you turn the pouch right side out, it can distort the shape or even leave permanent puckers in the seam. So be patient here. Sew slowly and stop if you need to adjust the fabric from the inside. Doing this carefully now will give you a much cleaner and more professional-looking result later. And this is what it should look like at this stage. Everything sewn together and holding its shape. Now go ahead and turn the pouch right side out to check the exterior. Take a moment to inspect the front carefully, especially along the curved seams. Look for any folds, tucks, or puckers that might have slipped through during sewing. If you notice anything that doesn't look smooth or aligned, this is the perfect time to fix it. It's much easier to make small corrections now before moving on rather than trying to fix them later, when everything is finished and turned right side out. Now it's time to attach the bias tape. We're using pre-made, store-bought bias tape for this step. No need to make your own. Start by folding it in half and finding the center. Match that center point with the center notch on your pouch. This is the same notch we used to align the side seams earlier. Then begin pinning the tape from the center outward, working your way to both ends. Pinning from the center helps distribute the tape evenly and keeps everything aligned. If you're a beginner, it might be easier to baste the bias tape in place by hand instead of pinning. That way, you'll have more control while sewing, and it helps avoid uneven seams or shifting. As you pin, make sure to position the tape so your next stitch, which will be 1 centimeter from the edge, either lands right on top of the previous seam or slightly overlaps it. This will give your finish a cleaner, more polished look. If you're new to sewing, I highly recommend basting the tape in place before stitching. It's an extra step, but it gives you more control and helps ensure a smooth result. Once everything is pinned in place, flip the pouch over and pin the lining on the other side, especially around the curved areas. This will help prevent the lining from shifting or forming folds that could get caught in the seam. Now, sew all the layers together with a 7 to 10 millimeter seam allowance. That's about 1/4 inch. Use a stitch length between 2.5 and 3 millimeters. And don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end to secure the seam. Be extra careful around the curves. Keep smoothing out the fabric as you go to avoid folds or puckering. After stitching, remove all the pins and take a moment to check your seam from the right side. Everything should look neat and clean. Before finishing the edge, take a moment to trim the seam allowance. Use sharp fabric scissors to carefully even out the edge, removing any bulk or uneven sections. I recommend leaving about 5 to 7 millimeters, or roughly 1/4 inch, of seam allowance. This will help your final binding sit flatter and look cleaner, especially around the curves. Now we're ready to finish the edge with the bias tape. Wrap the bias tape around the seam allowance, smoothing it evenly and folding it over to the other side. Pin it in place all the way around, taking your time to keep everything flat and even. If you're a beginner, you might find it easier to baste the tape by hand instead of using pins. That gives you more control while sewing. As you reach the top corners, leave about 1 to 1.5 centimeters, that's around 3/8 to 9/16 of an inch, of tape extending past the edge. To form a clean corner, trim the excess bias tape diagonally on both sides. Then fold the tip inward and wrap the tape around, forming a neat finished edge. Do the same on the other side. Once both ends are secured, your binding is ready for the final stitching. At this point, you have 2 options. You can top stitch along the edge, sewing about 2 millimeters from the previous seam, right where the tape folds over. Or if you prefer a more invisible look, you can sew the tape by hand using a slip stitch. Personally, I prefer hand stitching. It gives a softer, more elegant finish. So here's how I do it. Start by making a small anchor stitch in the corner to secure the end of the bias tape. Then begin alternating tiny stitches. First into the folded edge of the tape, then into the lining fabric just below it. Tape, lining, tape, lining. Working your way along the edge. Each stitch should be shallow and parallel. just enough to hold the tape in place without showing on the outside. As you go, gently pull the thread to close the seam. This draws the tape and lining together and creates a clean, nearly invisible line. Take your time with this step. There's something really satisfying about finishing a handmade piece with this kind of detail. Once you finish stitching all the way around the tape, make a couple of small knots to secure the thread. Then tuck the thread end between the layers of the bias tape to hide it completely. This gives you a clean finish, with no visible ends. Now take a look at the inside of your pouch. Everything is neatly enclosed with the bias tape and looks beautifully finished. Turn your pouch right side out and gently shape the seams with your fingers. Make sure everything is smoothed out, especially around the curves. Zip it closed, and your pouch is complete. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me. Thanks so much for watching, and happy sewing!